Hello everyone, welcome back to our channel. In this video, we are going to learn about one of the Python's most useful built-in data types, and that is tuples. If you have already learned about Python list, you will notice that tuples look very similar to list. In fact, many beginners get confused between these two because they both store multiple values in single variable. But don't worry, in this video, we'll clearly understand the difference between them. And if you are new to Python list, you can find the list tutorial linked in the description below. In this tutorial, we learn what tuples are, how to create them, how to access their elements, and understand one of their most important features, that is immutability. We'll also cover tuple packing and unpacking, tuple methods, useful built-in functions, looping through tuples, membership operators, concatenation, repetition, and nested tuples with practical examples. So let's begin by understanding what exactly a tuple is. A tuple is one of the Python's built-in data type that allows us to store multiple values inside a single variable. At first, it looks very similar to list. Both can store multiple values but preserves the order of the items, and both can even store different types of data together. But there is one important difference. Once tuple is created, its content cannot be changed. In Python, we'll call this as immutability. That means you can read the values inside a tuple whenever you want, but you can't modify or replace or delete individual elements. This makes tuple useful whenever you have a data that should remain fixed throughout your program. For example, coordinates like latitude and longitude, days of the weeks, months of years, RGB color values or employee IDs, these are values that usually don't change once they are created. Now let's understand important characteristics of tuples. First, tuples are ordered, which means Python remembers the position of every element. Next, they are immutable, so once it is created, the data cannot be modified. Third, tuples allow duplicate values. If the same values appears multiple times, Python stores all of them. And finally, tuples are heterogeneous, meaning they can store different data types together. Now, let's learn all the different ways to create a tuple. Creating tuples in Python is actually very simple. In fact, Python gives us several different methods to create them. Most of the time, we'll use first method, but it's good to know all of them because you will see them in real Python programs. Most common way is simply writing the values inside parentheses. That is the first method. Let's see a simple example for this method. In numbers variable, I've written four numbers and I print them. I've written inside parentheses. This is one of the most used method to create tuples. You can see here you will get the tuples as output. This is the standard way of creating tuples. See the next method. Here parentheses are actually optional. Without using parentheses, now let's create the tuple. I'll show an example for that. Numbers. In the last example, I took parentheses. Here, without parentheses, directly I'm writing four numbers and I'm printing them and I'm asking which type of data the number variable is containing. If I run this code, even though we didn't use the parentheses here, it is still creating tuple because the comma are what actually defines a tuple. But I recommend you using parentheses because it will make your code easier to read. Third is single element tuple. This is one of the place where many beginners will make mistake. Suppose I want to create a tuple containing only one value. We'll see how to create it in an example. Value is equals to, in parentheses I have given 5 and type of value. You can see here it is not a tuple. It is telling that this 5 which is written inside parentheses is an integer. Now I'll show you the correct way. You can see here after 5 I've written a comma and then I'm typing type of value. You can see you are getting tuple. This comma is very important here. For single element tuple it is required. Without comma, Python will consider it as integer when we are creating a single value tuple. We can also create tuples using built-in tuple function. You can see here in the example t is equals to tuple of, here inside parentheses we have written a list, and when we print this thing, you will get three numbers inside parentheses. It means here tuple function is converting the list into tuples. Finally, if you need an empty tuple, simply write empty parenthesis. Here we have created a tuple that doesn't contain any value. Later in the program, you can use it whenever you need. Simply, if you write empty parenthesis, it will create an empty tuple. So these are the different ways to create tuples in Python. In real projects, you mostly use parenthesis, occasionally type function, type constructor, and remember for single element tuple, writing this comma is important. After creating, the next question would be how to access values which is stored inside the tuple. That's what we learn in next section. Accessing tuple elements. Just like list, tuple elements are accessed using indexing. And remember, Python uses zero-based indexing. That simply means the first element in the index is 0 and the second element at the index is 1 and so on. So, whenever you want a particular value from a tuple, you simply provide its index inside square brackets. Let's see how this works in an example. I have created a tuple containing 4 values and let's access them one by one. These are the 4 values: Python 3.14, true and 100, integer, boolean, floating number and string. Now I'm printing t of 0, which means the index number is 0 and I'm asking the value in the 0th position, then 1, then in first position, second position, third, minus 1 means last element, minus 2 is nothing but second last element. If I run this code, you can see in the 0th position, Python is there. In the first position, 3.14 is there. Second position, true. In the third index, 100 is there. Again, minus 1 is nothing but last element, 100. Last second element is true. Slicing a tuple. Besides accessing a single element, sometimes we want multiple elements together. For that, Python provides slicing. Now, I'll explain this concept and this example we'll see in VS Code. In this tuple, there are 5 values and we'll access values 1 to 4, colon 3, 2 colon, double colon 2. We'll understand each one. T of 1 colon 4. It starts from index 1 and goes up, but it doesn't include index 4. So it returns 20, 30 and 40. Colon 3. It starts from beginning and stops before index 3. 2 colon starts at index 2 and continues until the end. Double colon 2 is nothing but it will skip every alternative elements because the step value, if we give 3, it will skip for every 3 values. Finally, colon colon minus 1, it will reverse the whole tuple. If I run this code, you can check here. And important thing here is after slicing, Python still returns another tuple. It doesn't convert the result into list. So slicing creates a new tuple without changing the original one. Our next topic is tuple immutability. Earlier, I mentioned that tuples are immutable. But what exactly does that mean? It simply means that once tuple is created, its content cannot be modified. You cannot replace an existing element, you cannot add new element, and you cannot remove an existing element. The data inside tuple will remain fixed. Now, being immutable doesn't mean that tuples are useless. There are still many things we can do with them. We can access elements using indexing and slicing. We can join two tuples together using the plus operator. And we can repeat tuples using the multiplication operator. These operations doesn't modify the original tuple. Instead, they create a completely new tuple. But if you try to directly modify the tuple, Python immediately throws an error. Let's see an example. In T of 0th position, we have value 10 and I'm trying to replace that 10 with 99. And if I run this code, I'll get error. It means Python doesn't allow replacing an element inside tuple. Now we'll see an example adding an element. We are using tuple.append method here. If I run this code, you can see we are getting error. Since tuple cannot grow, it doesn't even provide a method to add any elements. Now we'll see how to remove an element. I'm using del keyword remove this t of 1, that is 20. If I run this code, you can see again you are getting error. It means individual elements cannot be deleted from tuple. So whenever your data should never change during the execution of program, tuples are an excellent choice. In the next section, we learn another powerful feature of tuples called packing and unpacking. So far, we have learned what tuples are and how to create, how to access, and also why they are immutable. Now, let's learn interesting feature of tuple called packing and unpacking. The names might sound a little technical, but the concept is actually very simple. Think about packing a gift box. You put multiple elements, items into one box. Later, when someone opens the box, they take those items out one by one. Python does exactly same thing with tuples. Packing means putting multiple values into tuple. Unpacking means taking those values out of tuple and storing them in separate variable. Let's understand both one by one. Let's start with tuple packing. It simply means grouping multiple elements into single tuple. For example, suppose I have 5 different values 10, 20, 30, Python, and true. You can see here. Instead of storing them separately, I can pack them into one tuple. I'll show you this in example. You can see, as I said, inside t variable, I've given these values and I'm printing that. And that type of variable is, you can see, the type is class tuple and we are printing all those values. And notice that I'm not even using parentheses here. I've simply written the values separated by commas. Python automatically understood that it is a tuple. In tuple unpacking, let's do the opposite. Suppose someone gives you a tuple. Instead of accessing every value using indexing, you can directly assign every value to separate variables. This is called tuple unpacking. I'll explain the same in example. Here Python will automatically assign 10 to A, 20 to B and 30 to C, these variables, and will print them all separately. I'll run this code and you can check the order. The first value goes in the first variable, second value goes in the second variable, and so on. Now, Python also gives us some advanced unpacking techniques. Let's look at them one by one. First is extended unpacking. Sometimes you don't know how many values are left. Instead of creating lots of variable, you can collect them together using star separator. Let's see an example. I've written star rest is equals to t. A comma star rest is equals to t. And I'm printing a and rest both. I'll run this code and explain. In a variable, you can see the first value. Everything else goes into rest variable. And yes, the rest becomes list here. This is called extended unpacking. I hope you're clear. Let's see the next one, that is skipping values. Sometimes we don't need every value from the tuple. Maybe we only need first and third values and the other are not important. In that situation, Python lets us to skip unwanted values by using an underscore. The underscore is just a placeholder that will tells Python that I'm ignoring this value. If you look at the example on the slide, the tuple has 4 values 10, 20, 30 and 40. We assign the first value to A, skip the second value and assign the third value to C, and we are skipping the fourth value as well. So after unpacking, A becomes 10 and C becomes 30, while the skipped values are simply ignored. We can use this when you need only few values from tuple. Next is swapping variables. This is another useful feature of tuple unpacking, that is swapping values between variables. Normally in many programming languages you need a temporary variable to swap two values. But in Python it's more simpler. As shown here, before swapping, A contains 5 and B contains 10. Then we simply write A comma B is equals to B comma A. Behind the scenes, Python packs values on right side into the tuple and immediately it will unpack them into variable which is on the left side. After that single statement, A will become 10 and B becomes 5. And you can see them used in real Python programs. Now we'll see tuple methods. In fact, tuples have only two built-in methods. One is count method and another one is index method. These methods don't modify the tuple, they simply return information about the value stored inside the tuple. Let's start with count method. As the name suggests, this method counts how many times a particular value appears inside tuple. This always returns an integer, and if the value doesn't exist in tuple, it simply returns 0 instead of giving an error. Let's see an example for this. Here I've created a tuple containing few duplicate values. I'm counting how many times the value 2 appears. Next I'm counting how many times the value 3 appears, and finally I'll check how many times 5 appears, which actually doesn't exist in tuple. If I run this code, you can see 2 appears 4 times. So Python returns 4 and 3 appears 1 time. And since 5 is not there in the tuple, it simply returns 0. Now let's look at second method, that is index. Instead of counting occurrences, this method tells us the position or index of a value inside the tuple. One important thing to remember here is if a value appears multiple times, index method always returns the first occurrence. For example, if the tuple contains 10, 20, 30, 20 and 40, then t dot index of 20 will return 1, even though another 20 exists later in the tuple. Also remember that indexing starts from 0. One more thing is, if the value you are searching for doesn't exist in tuple, Python raises value error instead of returning -1 or 0. So whenever you are using index method, make sure that values actually exist before calling it. Before we continue with next topic, let me quickly show you a Python project that I recently built. I think you will find it really useful if you are working with documents. This project is a file password protector built entirely using Python. Instead of protecting only PDF files, this application lets you to add password protect to several commonly used file types, including Microsoft Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and zip files. Using this application is very simple. You just have to select a file you want to protect, enter a password, confirm it, choose where you want to save the protected file, and the application will create a secure password protect copy while keeping your original file unchanged. I also added several validations to make it user friendly. If you're interested in learning how this project works or you would like to use it in your own work, I'll provide the complete source code in the description below. You can download it, explore the code, and even you can customize it according to your own requirements. Now let's continue with our tutorial. Let's have a look at useful built-in Python functions that works with tuples. These are not tuple methods like count or index. Instead, they will generate Python functions that can also be used with tuples. Let's go through them one by one. First function is len function. It simply returns the total number of elements present in the tuple. So, if a tuple contains 4 values, len method returns 4. Next, we have max. This returns the largest value in the tuple. Looking at the example here, the largest value is 9. If I write max of tuple, it will return 9. Similarly, min function returns the smallest value from the tuple. In fact, in this example, the smallest value is 1. Next is the sum function. It will add all the numeric values in tuple and return the total. As shown here, the sum of all these elements is 15. An important thing here to notice, the sum function is used only when there are numeric values. If the tuple contains string, for example, instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, if it contains A, B, C, and D, Python writes a type error. Sum function is only used at the numerical values. Next is any. In this function check whether at least one value in the tuple is true. If even one element is true, the result will be true. Another is or. It checks whether every element in the tuple is true. If even one element is false, the result will become false. Here all are true, so only the result is true. If any one value is false, the result would be false. Finally, we have sorted. This will return the element in sorted order. One thing to notice here is it returns a new sorted list, not a tuple. The result is in the list. Here in this example, you can see for this tuple, we have applied all the methods here and you can check the results. Now let's see how we can go through every element sorted inside a tuple. Since tuple are iterable, Python allows us to access each elements one by one using loop. And most common approach is for loop. Here, Python automatically takes one element at a time from tuple until every element has been processed. This is easiest way iterable through tuples. Second approach is using enumerate. This is useful when you need both position of the element and its value at the same time. As you can see in the output, it displays the index along with the corresponding values. The third approach is using while loop. Here, instead of getting elements automatically, we manually control the index. We start from a zeroth index and keep increasing it until we have accessed every element in the tuple. So, depending on your requirement, you can use any of these three approaches. But in real Python programs, for loop is usually most preferred because it's simple and easy. Now let's learn how to check whether a value exists inside a tuple. For this, Python provides two membership operators, in and not in. The in operator check whether a value is present inside the tuple. If the value exists, Python returns true, otherwise it returns false. You can see in this example an output shown here. We are telling to print banana in tuple T. If it is present, true. Grape is not at all there in the tuple. If we are telling in tuple, it will tell false. The not operator works exactly the opposite. It checks whether a value is not present in tuple. If it does exist, it will return false. Here you can see how membership operators are commonly used inside if-else condition. This is very useful when you want your program to perform different operations depending on whether a value exists in the tuple or not. So the points are simple. Use in when you want to check if a value exists. Use not in when you want to check if the value doesn't exist. Now let's learn two simple operations that we can perform with tuples. That is concatenation and repetition. Let's start with concatenation. It simply means joining two or more tuples together, and for that we'll use plus operator. In this example, the first tuple contains values 1, 2 and 3 and second value contains A and B. When we add these two tuples using plus operator, Python creates a new tuple containing all the elements from both tuples. You can see here. You can also join more than two tuples. Now let's look at a repetition, that is repeat a tuple. It will create multiple copies of same tuple, and for this we'll use asterisk operator that looks like star. In the example, tuple is multiplied by 2, so the entire tuple is repeated twice. You can see here in the output. In second example, you can see tuple is multiplied by 3, so it appears 3 times. Here in R3, it shows that repeating also works with strings inside tuples. Here tuple containing Python is repeated 4 times and you can see the same in the output. So repetition also creates a new tuple by repeating the existing tuple the specified number of times. So use plus operator when you want to join tuples and use asterisk operator when you want to repeat the tuple. In both the cases, Python returns new tuple while original tuple remain unchanged. Now let's understand another useful concept called nested tuples. A nested tuple is simply a tuple that containing another tuple as its element. Let's look at the first section. Let's look at here. Let's look at creating nested tuples. Here, instead of storing numbers directly, the outer tuple containing three smaller tuples, when we print it, Python displays the complete nested structure exactly as shown here. Next, let's see accessing elements in nested tuple. Since we are dealing with tuples inside another tuple, we use multiple indexing. In the first statement, you can see we are trying to get the value in the 0th position. That is first in a tuple, which is 1, 2. Then 0 and 0. First, it will select the first inner tuple and then select its first element. This is the 0th. In that, two values are there. Again, this is the 0th value, that is 1. Similarly, it will go for 1, 0 and 1. Now it is selected these two values. In that also we are asking for first value, that is 0 and 1. It will return 4 in same way. So whenever you are working with nested tuples, you first choose the outer tuple index and then we should choose the inner tuple index. Now let's look at the looping through nested tuples. Here the first for loop goes through each inner tuple one by one. Then second for loop goes through every element inside those inner tuples. That's why the final output is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6, because every value is printed one after the other. At this point, you should have solid understanding of how tuples works and when to use them in your Python programs. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more Python tutorials. Thank you for watching this video. I'll see you in the next video.